Check, 1, 2, check.
Sound test 1, 2, 3. Sound test 1, 2, 3.
I can hear you, Caitlin.
Thank you very much. Test number 2 for the YouTube channel. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
I'll do it here.
Hey everyone, we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Bonjour tout le monde. We're going to commence the Community Services Committee for Tuesday, March 28th, 2023. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire nord-sudais de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence enrichie et continue d'enrichir ces terres. We have not received any regrets this morning. I'll ask the committee coordinator to do the roll.
Councillor Brown,
Here.
Councillor Carr,
Here.
Councillor Desroches,
Here.
Councillor Hill,
Here.
Councillor Kavanagh,
Present.
Councillor King,
Here.
Councillor Lowe,
Here.
Councillor Plante,
Ici.
Councillor Troster,
Here.
Vice Chair Bradley,
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Je présente.
Yep, Quorum Chair.
See, we have no declarations of interest, and we'll move to number 3, confirmation of the minutes. Is that item carried? Carried. Carried, wonderful. 4.1, response to inquiries. We have an inquiry, court ruling on Waterloo homeless encampment. Is that item received, or did someone want to lift that item?
I would like to lift the item, please.
Okay, so I understand we have a motion on if the committee would concur to lift that item. Committee coordinator, could we do that with concurrence of committee as opposed to a vote? Okay, does the committee concur with lifting that item to the agenda? Okay, wonderful. So we'll put that item on hold. Our next item is 5.1. That is accountability agreements with Ontario Health. There are no motions on this. There's no presentations. I understand that this is a statutorily required from the province. Is this item carried, or are there any questions, or somebody wants to hold it? No, carried. Item 6.1, we have a status update, Community Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending March 16th. Is this item carried, or would somebody like to hold it? Oh, it's just a list of the inquiries and the motion that they're looking at still. Okay, is that received? Received. Okay, wonderful. 7.1, it is the sale of naming rights, Canada Recreation Complex. We don't have any motions. We don't have any presentations. Did someone want to, and we don't have any delegations, but did somebody have a question or want to hold that item?
Can we please hold it?
Councillor Lowe, is it a quick question? And okay, all right, wonderful. So we'll hold that item. Wonderful. We'll hold that item then. And okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I know it totally takes. Okay, so we're going to go back to the held items then. So we'll go back to 4.1. That's the court. We'll keep going through, but that's at the end. Okay. We were just going through the consent agenda to start. Okay. We'll go back to 4.1. That's the court ruling on Waterloo homeless encampment. And I understand that Councillor Plante had a question about this.
Oui, merci beaucoup. I was just wondering, a question for city staff. Have we looked at other legal analysis on the Waterloo ruling in terms of what other municipalities have determined their response will be to encampments in their similarly sized jurisdictions?
Through you, Chair, it's Genevieve on behalf of Legal Services. I know Stuart Huxley is just logging on as well, and he worked on the inquiry and works closely with Bylaw Services. But the inquiry does look at other municipalities and some rulings. It's my understanding that, from the media, Kingston is also looking at this. But other than what is in the inquiry response, that's the extent of the information that we have on this topic at this time.
Thank you. I just wanted, because there is a robust level of case law that is now coming out of British Columbia and the United States on this issue that is consistent with the idea that, homes provide dignity and people deserve a home. So I was just wondering if that was also taken into account into the analysis as well. Merci.
Through you, Chair, the charter applies, entirely in Canada. However, bylaws are here by the municipality. And so we can consider what other provinces have. However, what's important to note is also the jurisdiction and the application of court decisions. And so court decisions at the Superior Court in Ontario are not binding on other provinces. And so this is the same at the Court of Appeal level. And so while they might consider other decisions from other provinces, it's really the Supreme Court that would make a determination that would apply to the country as a whole.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. Councillor Troster.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just wondering, so it seems that the Waterloo decision hinged on the fact that the municipality did not have shelter space available at the time. So I'm just curious, what tools do we have to monitor our capacity in the shelter system here in Ottawa? And how would we find out as a committee if the shelters are full for the purpose of our legal obligations when it comes to encampments?
Through you, Chair, and maybe I'll hand it over to staff for specific details on how they monitor shelter capacity. But I just want to clarify that the assessment that was done was not only on shelter capacity, but they also looked at the factual, situation. So the assessment also included the encampment in question, whether, the use of the land, the circumstances of the residents in the encampments, and the services that were available if, adequacy and accessibility to shelters. And I'll hand it over to staff with that sort of framework of the analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a very good point in terms of making sure that we have sufficient capacity when responding to people who are unsheltered, especially if dismantle is in order. And fortunately, in Ottawa, we have had the opportunity to be able to provide sufficient shelter beds for people who want to come inside. That has always been a guiding principle, which continues today. And we hope that we will be able to continue that practice in the future to make sure that we have a system that has the capacity to respond to anyone who wants to come inside for shelter.
Thank you very much. Now, I know that our shelter system is provided by a mix of different organizations contracted out by the city, as well as the physical distancing centers have city staff in them. Do we have any sort of mechanism for comparing, contrasting shelter conditions? I'll just tell you, in my office, when people come to us at the end of the line and are needing shelter, they certainly express fear about some facilities rather than others in terms of the condition. I won't name the specific shelters, but because we contract out charitable organizations to do this work, what mechanisms do we have to compare and contrast and to monitor conditions from shelter to shelter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Luckily, in Ottawa, we have what we call Ottawa Shelter Standards that were approved by council, and certainly encouraging all municipalities to have these standards in place. And so shelters are expected to follow basic requirements in all areas of functioning of the shelter to make sure that that safety is paramount in that the operations are in the best interest of the clients. And our staff do, thorough inspections of the premises. And if there are any deficiencies, then those deficiencies are addressed quickly.
Sorry, one more follow-up. So if we're hearing from residents that they have experienced conditions that they don't believe to be acceptable, because I know that one of the concerns with the Waterloo encampment and the Toronto encampments, which were ultimately dismantled, were concerns about shelter conditions. Who might we connect with? What is the process for reporting? Because, people who are experiencing the system obviously have a different experience than people who are managing the system. So what's the best mechanism for reporting up that experience?
Yes, very good question, Madam Chair. The best process would be to communicate with housing services, communicate with our staff, and we will make sure that we follow up on any complaint that is brought forward about a particular organization or a particular program. And we will follow up to make sure every complaint that we get, we follow up to make sure that that it's investigated thoroughly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide some very brief context to the Waterloo case, because this was discussed at AMO this past week. We met as a board on Friday, and our guest speaker on the Thursday night committee of the whole meeting was the executive director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And in her presentation, she talked about the justice's January decision, and basically housing is a human right that trumps many other rights that we think we have, generally speaking, in our community. And a municipality must prove that basically all housing options have been exhausted before it thinks about evicting an encampment. So if you have an encampment in your city and the shelters are full, then there are no other options for people to take. I'm paraphrasing the justice's decision here. And if people don't like the fact that there's an encampment in a park, for example, and they feel that their rights to enjoy the park are being infringed upon, that does not trump someone's right to housing. And it's very clear that housing trumps many other rights we think we have as a member of a neighborhood or a community. And so municipalities going forward will have to ensure that all available options are exhausted before taking action against an encampment should that be erected in their city. But it's a very interesting conversation. And we had someone from Waterloo to present as well. There were some technical issues, which he will follow up and share with the board at a later date. But I just wanted to share that this morning.
Thank you. That was helpful insight. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup. I just wanted to follow up a bit on Councillor Truster's comments about a complaint mechanism. Ottawa Inner City Health has been asking for several years for like an ombudsman type position where people could go and report complaints, and in like an impartial manner they would be looked at. And I just want to make a clarifying comment too to yourself, Councillor Brockington, that shelters are not housing. They're just sort of keeping people overnight, and then in the morning they have to sort of fend for themselves. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to get some clarification from staff. I heard that in Ottawa that we have shelter capacity. Have we, over the past 3 years, for example, have we ever had a case where we haven't had the capacity to house people that we've either sleeping rough in the street that we've tried to house? Have we ever had an issue where shelters are at capacity, and what steps have been taken in order to ensure that anyone that wants a bed can have one?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my knowledge, and thankfully, we have not been in a situation where someone was refused shelter. For example, coming to a shelter door, asking to come in and being turned away because they could not accommodate them. I just want to say that our community shelters are doing extraordinary work in extraordinary circumstances, and they will do everything they can to make sure that the person is not left outside. So again, to my knowledge, that scenario has not presented itself. as long as we as a community are able to sustain a capacity level that will meet our needs.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Yeah, so and just a point of clarification, in your current triage system that includes the shelter system, physical distancing centers, there's never a case where anyone is turned away? Or, and just the corollary to that, just with respect to encampments, is there any proactive work that is being done when meeting with folks in the encampments to get them into the system, into the shelter or physical distancing center, whatever the case may be? Can you just describe that a little bit so we have a good understanding?
Yes, and again, to the question, no, we don't have an instance where someone was turned away. However, people may choose not to come in, which is different. But to my knowledge, no one has been turned away in that situation. With respect to reaching out to encampments, so we have outreach services that are reaching out to people who are encampments. They identify the individuals, they do case management, they follow up on their needs. So they start by establishing a relationship, identifying what their needs are, and moving them to a housing, using a housing focused approach. They move them towards securing housing, which along the way might mean getting some identification and some filling out some applications to be on a centralized wait list, for example. So doing all those things to move that person towards housing.
Okay, and so just one more clarification, when we're talking about the Waterloo decision and the impacts that it's going to have, I'm wondering, in the case where there are encampments, I mean, I've got an encampment in my neighborhood presently, they're all over the place, where we're doing proactive research and people don't want to go into the system. They want to, as you've described, what does that mean for us in terms of breaking up the encampments? Do we have the, like, if people don't want to go into the system, is the outcome of the decision the same, that the encampments have to be left, even if we have space? I guess is my question, and maybe that's a question for legal. I'm not sure.
No, I mean, we try to support the people to move along as much as possible, and to take the time required to find more suitable housing. There may be some circumstances where a dismantle may be required due to safety reasons or other reasons, but we really try to balance the needs of the community and the needs of people experiencing homelessness, and using a humane approach where we put the needs of the people first and try to resolve their homelessness by moving into housing, as opposed to perpetuating a cycle of homelessness and encampments.
Yeah, I guess my question is, given this decision, can we leave the encampment based on the decision, even if we have spaces in the shelter? Does that make sense?
Is that for?
I can weigh in through you, Chair. I think, and Councillor, correct me if I'm wrong, the question is, can we permit encampments? Is that the question?
Yeah, in light of the decision, can we permit encampments in the case, here in Ottawa, we have enough space in the shelter. It's not the same system where we haven't, it's not the same situation where we haven't had the space. We don't have the space, is my understanding. So do we continue to permit encampments, is my question, if we have the spaces?
Through you, Chair, what the Waterloo decision tells us is that first, we use the reasonable outreach and support efforts that staff were explaining a few moments ago. And second of all, if we do decide that, we've done the reasonable outreach and supports, and that the encampment remains and individuals wish to remain in the encampment, then I think it becomes a staff decision to look at what the Waterloo decision tells us in terms of the factual assessment that needs to be done. So not just the shelter space. and determine if we're comfortable with, being able to satisfy the requirements of the Waterloo decision, and determine if it's best to evict the individuals in the encampment, or determine if there's a risk that, a similar decision would be issued here in Ottawa, considering the facts of the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. We're going to go to Councillor Kavanaugh, and Councillor Plante will do the wrap up. But Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, and thank you to my colleague for raising this. It's the first thing I think of as Chair of Ottawa Community Housing is what is the data on this, so that we can put more pressure to get dollars for housing. We don't want to put people in shelters. And I just want to know, are we monitoring these situations? It sounds like they're going to pop up. The weather's getting better. It may happen even more as people are desperate. And I think this is really important to know what's out there. I just want to know what the monitoring is, and are we using this as a data collection to show cases that how badly affordable housing is needed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, there is several tools that are being used to monitor the situation, including a GIS mapping that our team has developed before in partnership with our community partners, including Ottawa Police Service and bylaw and the NCC. So on a mapping level, we can see throughout the city at any given time where the encampments are located. On a ground level, with the work with the clients, the outreach teams and support workers reach out to every single individual to identify the individual, to build a case file, let's just say, around them, so that at any given time, we have a pretty good understanding sense of the number of people that are unsheltered, whether it be sleeping rough or in an actual encampment, that are located throughout the city, from Orleans to Canada and Greeley, and there's encampments all over the place. So we know the known locations and we know the individuals, and our outreach then work with the clients to move them to housing. That is the ultimate goal, is to resolve their homelessness from the street into permanent housing with supports.
Thank you very much. We have a waiting list of 12,000, unless I can be updated.
The centralized wait list, yes.
Yeah. Is that included in the number? Is that what you've just monitored?
Yes, because every person who's once they're identified on the street outreach workers would complete the centralized waitlist application form to put them on the list, so that they can have the homeless status and then get the housing benefits and so on. So that's part of the paperwork, let's just say, that needs to happen, and that our staff do.
Do we differentiate on our waiting list that some people are actually homeless rather than?
There is a homeless priority status on the centralized wait list, and these folks would be on that priority list status.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions and I have some questions about more of the case itself. My understanding, based on reading the memo, is that the unique factual circumstances that were noted means that everything is kind of case by case until an appeal succeeds at the Superior Court, Court of Appeals, correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, it was very factual, and the decision does give us sort of some guiding principles or considerations that should be taken into account if we were to tear down an encampment.
Okay, and then would I be correct in my interpretation that the injunction was to remove the encampment? The request for the injunction in Waterloo and then in Toronto and Hamilton was to request the removal of that encampment, and then it failed in Waterloo because, one, possibly they applied a bylaw that was less effective, and then two, reasonable outreach and efforts to support these people was not provided prior to seeking that injunction?
Through you, Chair, when I look at the decision, the exact wording was that the bylaw was inoperative. And particularly because the number of homeless persons exceeds the number of available accessible shelter beds in the region. That said, that one sentence taken on its own doesn't really represent exactly the assessment that the court later goes on to explain and to sort of outline the considerations that should be taken into account. But I think that very fact that there wasn't enough shelter beds did help answer the question that they could not tear it down at that time.
So that's kind of further to Councillor Brockington's point, that where someone's right to housing essentially trumps someone's enjoyment to a particular piece of land, even if it was vacant then.
So the decision does say that they did not have to analyze the enjoyment of the land, in particular because it wasn't a park in this case. So it would be, to be determined how a court might rule differently if it was a park. However, Councillor Brockington's pointing out of life and liberty, perhaps trumping the enjoyment of a park, would have to be debated.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Plant.
I just wanted to wrap this up by saying the judge cited in their decision a bunch of case law that confirms that the number one reason that people decide to go to encampments is because they are fearful of shelters. That is why people choose to sleep rough. That is why they choose to be outside. He gave a number of decisions, Bamberger versus Vancouver, Black versus City of Toronto, Fleming versus Reed, Fraser v. Canada, Nanaimo versus Courtoret. So I would encourage city staff to consider that when they are looking at housing options for people who need them. Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. Is this item received? Received. Thank you. So we will go back to item 7.1. That is the sale of naming rights for Canada Recreation Complex. And I believe that item was held by Councillor Lowe and Councillor Brockington. So I'll go to Councillor Lowe first.
Thank you. The decision to put the name on the community center, well, I don't exactly have an issue with it. I'm curious if it has to be the full name of the company or corporation. I know that I know the naming rights were purchased by that company, but do we have any say in how long that name is? Because Tony Graham Automotive Group Recreation Complex Canada is arguably a little long, and Tony Graham, I think, is enough of a household name in the city that people can just say Tony Graham and know that we're not talking about Tony Graham the person, but rather Tony Graham the corporation. So is that something we can suggest at all, like Tony Graham Canada Recreation Complex, or because there are other names there are other companies who have shortened their names a little bit to fit a little better on our recreation centers, like Minto, Cardell, and Richcraft.
Thank you, Chair. Generally, our approach is to negotiate this with the corporate sponsor. Obviously, because they are paying, and in this case, $1 million over 10 years, at the end of the day, this is part of their marketing, part of their branding of the complex to meet their business purposes. This is a name that they've told us that they want to use. The ward councillor has been consulted on this, and even though I think we all agree that Tony Graham would be a bit shorter, we can ask again, but at the end of the day, because we are selling them the naming rights, and it is to be of optimal benefit to them to do this is what attracts corporate sponsors to us. This is not the first time. We had a hard time getting our heads around Cardell Rec, for example, a couple of years ago. It doesn't necessarily flow off the tongue, but they did make a case that this was their marketing brand in Calgary, where they did a similar thing, and they insisted on it. So we can certainly have a discussion about the length of it with them, but I have to tell you that to get their signature on a contract, it may well be their preferred name that we go with.
Yeah, I understand. It is their money. It is their decision in the end. I'm just worried about the implications of somebody calling it TGAG because that is TGAG. But no, thanks very much.
Councillor Brockington.
Thank you. Yes, it's their money, but it's our building in a community that we serve for residents of the west end of the city. The name is too long. I understand what the general manager stated, but there's a way to get that shortened. I think we have to give that some serious consideration. A way to finesse whether signage on the interior of the building could have the full name if what gets printed has the full name, but just that outside sign and how we refer to it, I think could be shortened. You also don't want people to think that this is actually an automotive body shop when people answer the phone and get confused when they Google it and get an address and they show up and it's a rec center. But all that aside, I'm more concerned about how the monies get dispensed throughout the year. The motion talks about sort of a breakdown of the $100,000 a year over 10 years. The motion talks about putting some money aside for youth fitness, which is good in the summer months. And I just want the general manager to explain how that gets spread out throughout the city. What is the plan in this case?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I have to say that this program was created with a net revenue requirement to the city that's contained within the budget of my department, and that over the years, and this was done based on IBM efficiency review recommendations of 2005, I believe. The department has been carrying a fairly significant sponsorship and advertising revenue target since that time. So, the basic reason that we set about doing this and that we do this is to be able to meet that unmet revenue in the budget. However, since 2005, we've also come to realize was not necessarily part of the initial program, that sponsors want to see their money in action for community good, especially sponsors like Tony Graham that have been, into philanthropy and supporting community causes. There is great interest and great attraction to being able to have some of their sponsorship dollars go back into the community. So in this case, and staff work with them and offer them a variety of opportunities to sponsor, whether it's things like public skating or participation in one way or another. In this particular case, we landed on youth fitness, access for youth to our fitness spaces during the summer months. And a good portion of the money that you see identified there will be going to offset the lost revenue from that. The other part that we have learned over the years is that the local community, because their facilities now has a sponsor, is hoping to see some return. And so there is a provision in there. That site and that facility are host to things like Canada Day and various community celebrations. So there is money there to support a more local initiative on an annual basis. The other portion is upfront activation. Some funds will be required to, as Councillor, you mentioned, changing the signs internally and externally to the building. And even though the sponsor will be responsible for most of that, there are always incidentals that, at least in the first year or two, will require some city funding. The rest of it is really applied against a gap of, it's probably in the area of 800,000 of unmet sponsorship revenue that the department holds. We are seeing the market come back. This is a good indication. We will likely be before you with another one in the next little while to do this. But there really is an imperative to address the budget shortfall within the budget that was meant to be an efficiency, but has been a struggle to fully realize.
Thank you for that. The Canada Rec Center, how old is that center?
Sorry, Councillor, I can get you a date. I would say predates amalgamation. I'm not sure. I would think it's probably in the area of 30 to 40 years old.
That's what I would guess as well. And my understanding is this center's been renovated a number of times.
The center has had a major renovation about 15 years ago and is currently funded through the ISIP program to go through another wave of renovations. A good portion of the building, the non-arena part, was in almost unusable shape for a period of time. The first renovation created large public spaces upstairs, large rooms, meeting rooms, community programming rooms. And there is more work to do, which phase 3 of ISIP funded will be starting this year.
This center received millions of dollars leading up to the last federal election. Is that correct?
The ISIP announcement for the next phase of renovations did come mid last year, I believe.
So given that there are urban centers that are much older than this site that have never been renovated or repaired, and you know what I'm talking about, why is this center receiving a portion of the sponsorship dollars for capital purposes?
Chair, not for capital purposes. These are operating purposes. These are operating funds that come into the city and disappear at the end of each year. So there are a few $1,000s made available to the local community to support community animation, but the funding is not going towards, the sponsorship funding is not going towards capital renovations of any significance. There may be things like equipment that supports programming, those kinds of things. But by and large, we're talking about support of programming.
I was just reading the last bit of the motion that says, as well as capital and operating enhancements at the KRC Walter Baker Park site. So maybe those are minor in nature.
The intent is very minor because there isn't a lot of money, so this would not be anything large.
I only raise this, Madam Chair, because when the city sells land in River Ward, I always ask, can we dedicate part of the proceeds to River Ward needs? The answer is no. When private billboard owners sign agreements with the city and I need to sign off on those, I always ask, can part of those proceeds go towards River Ward needs? The answer is always no. So when I see a motion like this before us, where a center that is much younger, that's been renovated a few times, and I don't want to generalize, a community that can afford to pay for recreation services, and there are community centers in the city that have not had that same treatment, that's a concern for me because I don't think it's an equitable distribution of those funds. It's not a large portion. We're talking about $100,000 a year over 10 years, but I am interested in youth programming opportunities. The motion clearly states to access city fitness facilities. I want to see that spread out, and we'll work with the GM on how those monies will get spread out. But those are some of my main concerns with this motion before us. Thanks, Chair.
Just for my clarity, I have a quick question then. We have aging facilities across the city, and once again, we know of many opportunities that have happened already and that will happen in the future for the sale of naming rights. My question is that did Tony Graham did this corporation specifically want this facility? Is that why this was selected, or was this something that was consulted with them with a couple of options on the table?
Thank you, Chair. The city does have options of available facilities that were approved as part of the initial sponsorship program report, and Canada Recreation Complex is one of them. There are a host of others. Almost every facility of notable size that doesn't have a commemorative name attached to it is on there. In this case, staff did present them with some options. Canada Rec Center is very close to the Canada car dealerships in that area. And so this fits their area of interest where they want to profile their corporate name. And at the end, this is what they selected as the naming rights they want to purchase.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Chanier. Je voulais savoir parce que je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais la femme de Monsieur Graham, elle s'appelle Elisabeth. Elle est très impressionnante aussi. C'est elle qui a élevé des enfants. C'est elle qui a contribué à son succès comme attends, j'essaie de lire là, avec son concessionnaire de voitures. Elle a aussi fait beaucoup de levées de fonds pour la démence. Son mari est mort de ça. Est-ce qu'il y avait à un moment une discussion d'inclure son nom dans la commémoration du centre communautaire?
Madame la Présidente, comme j'ai mentionné au début, à la fin, c'est vraiment le choix de l'entreprise de choisir le nom. Leur nom afin des intentions de marketing sont Tony Graham. On sait très bien que maintenant, avec le décès de M. Graham, que c'est une entreprise familiale. La famille a démontré un intérêt de faire une commémoration non sponsorship, alors une commémoration simplement de la famille qui aurait possiblement lieu pour un parc dans le secteur. Mais pour l'édifice même, leur choix a été de se servir du nom de l'entreprise même. Comme on peut le faire avec la demande antérieure du conseiller, on peut certainement ouvrir la discussion, mais ce qu'on comprend de l'affaire, c'est qu'ils veulent, afin de marketing, de se servir du nom de l'entreprise même.
Okay, just to repeat in English. So Elizabeth Graham, who was his wife, was an equally impressive woman. She raised the children. She cared for her husband when he was having dementia. She's raised millions and millions of dollars for dementia. And only 13% of our community, of our city amenities are named after women. That includes streets, libraries, parks, community centers, rinks, et cetera. So my question then through you, the chair, is there a way we can ask the organization if we can include Elizabeth's name, although I understand it will lengthen the name of the community center, but is there a way we can maybe go back to the family and see if we can have Tony and Elizabeth Graham put on the nameplate for this community center? Merci.
And Chair, I can repeat my comments as previously mentioned. At the end of the day, this is a corporate sponsorship, not a commemorative naming, and so it is part of the marketing initiatives for this group. We can certainly have the discussion with them that if they're willing to consider what the councillor is proposing. But I suspect that what they will want to use is the name that they market their corporation under, which does not include the councillor, the female member of the family. We have had discussions on commemoration with this family, and they are interested outside of the sponsorship in looking at commemorating the family name in a broader way. And that is a discussion that we've taken into another file and would likely come back here should it lead to positive results.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Chenier. Through you, the chair, I'm not exactly sure what the process is, but is there a way by which we can go back to the family in some official, I don't know if we have to officialize it right here today, to ask if we can put Elizabeth's name on the naming of the community center? I just don't like women to get scraps.
I think we're confusing two things. We're
Okay.
confusing commemorative naming, which
Right.
is something within the realm of council to decide and determine. We consult with the community. We can change the dynamic. We've determined that we don't have enough of our community represented in those names, whether it's regarding gender or racialized communities or other communities that we represent. And we certainly have changed the way we've looked at that. This is the sale of naming rights to a corporation. This is a marketing tool that corporations use. It also generates money for the city that we don't have to turn back to our taxpayers and ask them for to fund into not only operational programs, but in some cases, capital funding that needs to go into these facilities. So while I would say that could be an offhand thing, the councillor is more than welcome to reach out to the corporation and see if they're coming forward and asking for a name so that they can market their brand, so they can generate more money for their company, and then in turn, potentially raise more money to put into our own facilities. I don't see any problem with it. It's unfortunate the name is a little long. I'm sure that residents in the community will come up with their own nicknames because we've seen that in other cases. But, you know, for instance, in my own community, we recently renamed the Blackburn Arena, the Lois Kemp Arena, after a phenomenal pioneer and icon in ringette and women's sports in the community. So we're on the trajectory to name more facilities after women. We will see that through the commemorative naming process. But in this case, we have a corporation that wants to give the city money, save taxpayers some cash and put money into youth programming. I don't see that we have any problem with this. So what I would suggest is if the councillor wants to reach out to that group, that we do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thanks very quickly, and thank you for that explanation, Chair. Well, I'm certainly no fan of privatization in any public amenities. I do see the value in terms of revenue generation for the city with respect to this. I'm not a huge fan of continuing to raise taxes. I find that property taxes are a regressive form of taxation. So I certainly accept that we need to do things like this. My question is actually with respect to staff on the naming rights program. I understand that, and perhaps this is an inquiry. I understand this program's been in place for a number of years, and I think it's been used for Lansdowne, many of our community centers. If I was interested in understanding the revenues that are generated from that program, is it best to put in an inquiry more or less? Because there wasn't any background information offered with this committee. I still consider myself to be new. I think I can say that for another few weeks. But if you can just let me know if an inquiry is best for that.
Chair, there's probably no need for a formal inquiry. We circulate as part of our use of delegated authority report every year the revenue from both, and the program has two streams. It has the sponsorship stream that we're talking about today, and it has an advertising stream. And we do produce on an annual basis a report that itemizes both the cash value and the in-kind value of what we receive from sponsors and advertisers. And I'd be glad to provide your office with last year's, which gives you a fairly, from year to year, it does not significantly vary. But we can certainly provide members of the committee with all of that information. It's readily available.
Yep, great. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments that Councillor Brockington had made with regard to the $35,000 that will be used for free weight and cardio summer memberships. Can staff comment on how they intend to distribute that? Will it be an application program? Will it be in every city facility? Will it just be if someone who's between the ages of 13 and 17 signs up for a membership, it's free? And is the intention for that to be annual for the next 10 years for the length of the sponsorship?
Thank you, Chair. We will promote this in all of our facilities to make sure that it's widely available. Of course, as youth come to get a membership for the summer, there would be no cost. Sign up would be the usual, through each facility. And generally, this is an in-person transaction because membership cards require a photograph to go on your card. So we will promote it. It is intended to be for the life of the agreements, so for 10 years. And we will monitor how well it's doing in terms of uptake and make adjustments after the initial launch. But for now, we are preparing for the initial launch once council gives approval to the report.
Great, thank you. So how did you arrive at that $35,000 number? Is that typically what we see in revenue from that age group? And if that's like, if it's more popular than we expect, is it a first come, first serve? Like, just trying to get a better understanding because I think it will be popular.
We arrived at it by looking at the current membership and assuming that if it was free, there would be an uptake in taking it on. And again, we will monitor and see how, it could be that we get twice as many as that, or half. So we really don't know. We had to make a calculation for the purpose of getting this going. We'll get a good indication. We suspect that those that were purchasing summer memberships will continue to do it and be happy not to pay, and that there will be an uptake from those that otherwise could not afford it, those kinds of things. It's still a fairly limited market in terms of a summer activity for youth who generally have summer jobs, all those other things. But we think other organizations have tried this. I believe Good Life did it last year or the year before, and they did not see a huge kind of groundswell of people getting memberships. But we're happy to report back as well on how we're doing in terms of the uptake of this and whether it's as we anticipated or otherwise.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor DeRoche.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I must say, Mr. Chenier, I was certainly very impressed when I saw this as part of the agenda. This is a file recreation that more often than not, when we open our binders, or open our e-devices, not enough swimming spaces, not enough ice time, not enough soccer fields, not enough pickleball, and the list goes on and on and on. And this is a tremendous opportunity to really bolster our facilities and our programs. So I'm thrilled to see it. And having been here for some time, these don't come very often, Mr. Chenier. How often would you say do we get $1 million on our doorsteps in such manner?
It's a fairly rare occasion, and with the pandemic, it became even rarer because eyes on the facility are the key thing, and when that decreases, so does the value of these. So we are in recovery phase, and we're starting to see interest now, but $1 million deals are few and far apart.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as a hockey and soccer dad, when I'm with my kids, in Ottawa and across Eastern Ontario, and across Ontario, we see this kind of sponsorship, whether that be companies or unions coming forward. And I often hear from parents, why doesn't the city do more of this so that we can stretch our resources to do more for the public? So I want to just thank you for the work that you've done on this file, and make it a positive experience for Tony Graham Automotive, because the work we're doing today will hopefully attract other companies. Could be a company, could be a union, to come forward and do more for the residents of the city of Ottawa. So I just want to go on record saying thank you to Tony Graham Automotive for their investments that hopefully we'll approve today. Thank you.
I know Councillor Hubley is next, but I'm going to leave him to the end as he is the ward councillor. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to thank you for your comments earlier. It actually reminded me of a conversation that came up around the time we were building Stage 1 LRT, when there was a proposal to shorten the name of Tunney's Pasture to Tunney's. And the argument that I made at the time was that we should keep the formal name and then people will shorten it on their own. So I do want to thank you for bringing that back up. And that was it's just a comment. Thanks.
Oh, and it's valid. And I am curious to see what names come forward, because I'm sure. Councillor Hubley on wrap up.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for having this on the agenda today. I want to start by thanking Dan Chenier and his staff for all the work on this. I want to share with my colleagues that this just didn't pop up. Dan and I have been working on a sponsorship agreement for this location for literally years. We were very close to closing the deal just pre-pandemic. And then when we shut down all the facilities, and as you know, businesses closed and everything during the pandemic, that opportunity was put aside. And so now here we are today with something for the community. I can tell you that I've talked about the sponsorship program for years at public events in the community and explained to residents that this was the only way that, or one of the best ways for us to get upgrades to our facilities and not have to go to the tax base to get it. Although I'm going to pause here and let you know, Chair, that I take great exception to a councillor's comments that the people of Canada have enough of their own money, so they don't need corporate sponsorship or tax dollars. That I think we'll debate later, but it was a very offensive comment that 50,000 people in the city that are taxpayers, and we have people in affordable housing, we have a shelter out here. We can't take every single resident and start charging them to fix roads and rec centers that are in need of repair because someone else feels that they were well off out here. So going back to this particular issue, Tony Graham Automotive is a nearby business. You can actually see it from the rooftop of the KRC. His family is, as Councillor Platt mentioned, his family is well known in the city. They're great citizens, and we appreciate that, and we're honored that they want to lend their name to this facility and assist us in building a future for this former rec center that I can't remember who asked, but this was built in the 80s. The actual land that it's on was amassed by the original mayor. Some might remember her as former Councillor Marion Wilkinson. So this has a long history in our community. We do our Canada Day celebration here where we get anywhere from 30 to 40,000 people on site for Canada Day. It's been occurring there for, well, pre-amalgamation. And so it's an honor to get this name in here so that we can wrap up or get started on a few projects that will benefit the area. I also want to explain why it's important that we get going with the naming here. There's a huge conflict that Dan's recreational staff are well aware of, and probably Councillor Hill may have already heard about this from his residents as well. When there's hockey tournaments at Walter Baker Center in Barrhaven, sometimes they show up at the Canada Rec Center, which is Walter Baker Park, and or vice versa, where people are supposed to be in Canada and they're going to Barrhaven. So much so that staff have a paper on hand that they hand out to people that have directions to the other facility on it. So it's an ongoing problem. It's not just one or two people. It's a conflict. And anybody that's ever taken their kids to a hockey tournament know that they don't need that extra stress in their life during that period. So anything we can do to help, such as putting another name on this facility, is going to help. As I think the chair mentioned, what does happen, in this case here, this was known as the Canada Rec Center, but the community shortened it to KRC. And that was the acronym that was used a lot for here. I'm sure something will come of this name. People will find a way to manage it. I don't think it's up to us as politicians to do that for them. Let's just see where the community goes with it. What I think the community will appreciate a lot is the investment in the area. And the youth, the contribution towards the youth programming across the city. I support that. I give kudos to Dan and the staff for figuring these things out. I also want to point out, Madam Chair, that with references to the naming of this being a male gender versus female, we have a lot of parks in Canada South named after females. Many of them I've done myself or been a part of. There's Laura Dubois Park was our most recent one that we did. There's Hope Cloutier Park. There's Christina Kiss. For those of you who don't know her, she was on the the national women's soccer team and scored a rare goal for Team Canada on there. And she's a young lady that's she doesn't live in this area anymore, but she's been to the park. She was there when we did the naming, and it really helps young people in the community know that it's possible to succeed in sports at a national level when they hear her story. We also have, at my count, 6 parks that are named after families. So I think we're doing our part to, it might not be balanced because there's less parks named after men, but we're doing our part to make sure that the people that are deserving and the families that are deserving of recognition are getting it. So I don't know if those same stats would apply in across the city. That's something for each of you to figure out yourself for your areas. But I'm quite proud of the gender balance that we've got out here in Canada South. I think, Madam Chair, I've covered off everything that has got mentioned there. Dan mentioned that what the money might get used for locally. In the first year, what it's going to do is help with the Canada Day celebration. It's going to actually pay for the rental of the stage. And that's going to help a community group that's made up of volunteers that put on this annual event. It's going to help them a lot because the money will be available for them up front. They won't have to go out and raise that piece. So hopefully more money can go into programming. So with that, Madam Chair, I hope that councillors will support this, and I can answer any questions anybody has at either at committee or they can get a hold of me separately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Schubele. Just one, I wanted to just inquire for clarity purposes, that 35,000 will go to youth access to city fitness facilities across the city, or is it just at this particular facility?
Chair, it will be across the city. The KRC actually does not have a fitness facility, but there are fitness facilities at nearby Canada Leisure Centre, Hunt Club Riverside, and Councillor Brockington, Bob McQuarrie in Europe. So any city Class A or B fitness facility that is in a city building will be eligible for this.
Wonderful. And I understand Vice Chair Bradley may have a direction to staff regarding naming rights in general.
No, it was more about the allocation of the $35,000. I'm just wondering if staff would accept as direction that any program that they create to allocate these funds would be barrier-free. So no application process for those youth. It would just be that if they are at a qualifying facility within that age bracket, that they would get the free fitness pass.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't quite get what the councillor was
So
asking.
when you're determining how you're going to create whatever program this would be for youth to have free memberships, that there would not be an application process. So a youth would not have to apply for a free membership. They would apply for a membership how they would normally apply for a membership. And if they qualify in that age range at a facility that is part of this program, they would just get it. So it's not like a hand-in-hand program where there's a subsidy or an equity pass where they have to make an application for a low income or whatever it might be. Just if they are 13 to 17 years old at a facility that's offering this free pass, they come and apply as normal, and there's no additional barrier to access the free membership.
Agreed. There is no, it wasn't our intent to create anything different. It simply waives the fee using the existing application, requesting the service. So no additional requirement.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. So is this item carried? Carried? Wonderful. Good discussion though, everyone. I think it was important that we kind of delve into that a little bit further. Item number 9.1 is an IPD originally distributed. It was use of delegated authority during 2021 by the Community and Social Services Department. Wonderful. And that item is just for notice or just for information. Item 10.1, that is the motion that was brought forward by Councillor Plante about private security used in and around shelters. I understand that Councillor Plante in her introduction of this has a presentation that she wanted to speak to. I will just clarify that we'll keep to the 5 minutes. Correct. I know we also have a delegation as well too. Correct.
Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for being here. This is a very sort of large issue that's happening in and around the city, but then in a more niche aspect is happening and mushrooming in and around Ward 12. So it's sort of the use of private private security in and around our shelters. And with me today, I also have Paul Stam and Sébastien Lemay, who are our constables in the Byward Market, and they will speak more to the operational side after my presentation is done. Merci d'être là. So next slide, please. So where can we find private security in and around the city of Ottawa? It's right here at City Hall, just outside the door. We have them in malls and shopping centers. We have them in government buildings. I'm sure you guys have seen the ads for commissionaires. We have them around construction sites, hospitals, if you've ever gone to a concert or a festival, post-secondary institutions, that includes also the colleges. OC Transpo, condos and apartments. OCH has their own version of security, bars and restaurants, and for the purpose of today's presentation, shelters. Next slide. Is everything okay? Okay. So a bit of the legal framework around this issue. So private security companies are not subject to the charter. The charter, section 32 of the charter says that the charter applies to government action. Therefore, the charter is not intended to govern relations between private actors. So in this case, obviously a private security company is a private actor. The leading case in this is R versus Buhay, which the Supreme Court of Canada adjudicated in 2003 in British Columbia. In this case, the court found that private security guards who conducted a search on a bus depot storage locker were not acting as agents of the police when they searched the locker, nor did they become agents when they later cooperated with police for a full-out drug investigation. So even if they conducted a bad search, it's too bad because they were private citizens. Police are obligated to respect an individual's charter rights, including the right of free and unreasonable search and seizure, Section 8, arbitrary detention, Section 9, rights to counsel, Section 10, and they get training on these rights and are liable to be cross-examined on how they have handled a particular situation. The remedy can be that the evidence gathered is excluded or the whole case is stayed, thrown out. There are internal disciplinary measures under the Police Services Act, and we have people who are on this.
Can I be excused? I'm on the Police Services Board and I feel that this is not appropriate for this forum, so I'm going to excuse myself.
So I'm actually going to ask Councillor Carr, just one second.
I'm done this section.
I do want to clarify though, that this doesn't belong at this committee in terms of the police aspect of it. In terms of the notice of motion that was brought forward, it was specific to security at shelters, at sites downtown. I'm not quite clear as to how this relates to this community and its functions.
Can I keep going?
If
it's done, this section is done. It's just giving a bit of the framework behind it. It's done. It's just,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So we have, like I said, we have a lot of private security in and around our shelters in the downtown core. There was a recent Ottawa Inner City Health did a sort of survey or sort of working group with some of their users, and it was described, the private security was described this way. Participants described the impact of interactions with security guards who work in shelters and stressed the importance of providing better training, supervision, and expectations of compassion when dealing with their clients. There are many disturbing descriptions in their response to people suffering from symptoms of mental illness and the role in making the impacts of trauma worse through their actions. This was noted to be of particular concern to women who generally describe feeling unsafe in the presence of security guards. There was a lengthy discussion about the kinds of training which are needed and agreement that clients would be willing to help with the development of training materials. Next slide. So, like I said in the beginning, we have a whole panoply of private security options in and around the city, not just in my ward. I wanted to sort of highlight two of them. So Neptune is a private security company. They are currently under investigation by the Quebec government because of their, hold on one second, because they managed an immigration detention center, and according to CBSA, their work jeopardized the safety of the migrants at the center. Shield Security, as some of you may know, is quite prominent in the Byward Market. Some of the things I hear often, and we sort of just address this, is that we can't talk about this because it's, it has to do with policing or this isn't the right forum, but it is a bit of I would actually acknowledge that it is a bit of a murky case because Shield Security was heavily involved in the application to move the Salvation Army from the Byward Market in the planning application to Montreal Road. They recorded over 10,000 incident reports between 2017 and 2022. I'm happy to share those incident reports with you. And this was a planning application that had gone in the previous council, and then it was approved, and then the plan was to go forward on Montreal Road. I'm not all that thrilled with Shield Security, but that is another discussion for another day. In June 2022, Housing Services received a subsequent direction to ensure that any future funding contracts between the City of Ottawa and Salvation Army include the provision of 24/7 on-site security with an active neighborhood patrol to provide supports and responses within a 2-block radius of the facility. Currently, Shield Security is sort of, I don't want to say holding the neighborhood a bit hostage, but because there's been some funding cuts because of a COVID contract they got, they are not patrolling the site 24 hours a day. They're only patrolling from, I believe it's like 9 to 5. They're not patrolling at night anymore. So it seems like security guards are taking over some of the duties that police officers normally do. We have no idea what kind of training they're getting. We don't know the extent of their powers. We don't know if we don't even know if we take notes, which is why I was hoping we could do a direction. Do you want me to do that now, or do you want me to wait till the other delegation is done?
So just for clarity, we have a motion on the floor. It is a motion that you presented as a notice of motion the last time. So if you are going to, I just, for clarity of your intention, are you looking still to discuss this motion? Or are you looking to replace it with a direction? We would need concurrence of the committee to go forward with that.
Well, I would like to hear from our guests, and then I would like to go towards the direction.
Okay, then I would hesitate to bring forward a direction until we have some conversation with our guests, because we still are looking at the motion as it stands on the floor that was presented before.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Thank you. So I will now ask our delegation, our constables, Lemay and Stam, and I will just clarify once again, this is Community Services Committee. So once again, in the realm of the conversation and this committee's mandate. So it's not necessarily about policing. We are also, I'll just clarify for members of the committee, we are not in a position to direct police, Ottawa Police. That is not our purpose. So sorry, with all that, with all those strings attached, please proceed.
Merci, Madam Chair. I'm Sebastien. I've been a community police officer for Lower Town in the Market for 6 years. Essentially, I'm here today to answer any question and help shed some light into the issues that Councillor Plount is bringing forward. I'm joined by my colleague, Constable Paul Stam.
Okay. Councillor Plount?
Yeah, is it okay if I pose some questions?
Yes, I just want to make really clear, and I think this is our second committee, and the first one was 45 plus delegations long. It was budget. This is our second one. I will just say that going forward, I will absolutely be adamant that committee discussions remain within the scope of this committee. We have a very important committee. It impacts so many people in our city. It has I think it has the largest budget, and it has many, many implications for the decisions we make on people and their well-being. So I really do appreciate where we're going with this, but I will say that if you can direct your questions to this committee proper, because if it's matters of policing, that belongs at the police board, because that is very separate from our ability to influence her. So I will let you go ahead with that, but I'll just say for future, but okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Constable Lemay. How often would you say that you and Constable Stam interact with businesses, shelter clients, shelter staff, and residents?
All of those stakeholders, Madam Chair, we definitely are in communication with on a almost daily basis. There are some scheduled meetings, either weekly or monthly, with those different stakeholders. But on any given day, Constable Stam and myself make ourselves available to address those stakeholders' needs. So again, it can vary between once or twice a day to several times a week.
And would it be fair to say that all of the shelters use private security?
To my knowledge, 2 of the 3 main shelters have private security, and I believe that the third one uses in-house staff.
And they don't just walk around, do they? What role does private security play in our shelter system?
Essentially, private security companies are hired by the agencies that, again, that hire them. Not to speak too much in regards to authority under the Trespass to Property Act, but they would only have authority on the private property itself.
Would you say that private security companies also do things like, first aid, and they sort of are an auxiliary force that sort of buttresses between ambulance, fire, and yourself?
So that would be likely up to the security companies to speak, but as a police officer, I have seen them engage on those examples that you're giving. Depending on the security company and the mandate that they're given by the shelter that hires them, there might be some training into obviously first aid and administering Narcan for say overdoses or things of that nature.
Do you know if they receive any training? Do they ever speak to you about that?
I'm not aware officially, or I cannot confirm that, but that would be certainly up to the shelters that hire them to speak to.
Do you ever,
So
do you know if they?
I'm
keep
going
any-
to cut in, and I apologize for cutting in. I think everybody's still figuring out the committee process and everything, but I don't believe that we're in order here in respect to this. Typically, delegations will come and speak and do a presentation on their thoughts, their expertise and those things. It's not a matter of them coming and then we asking them questions. We ask them questions based on their presentation to us. So what I would like to know is maybe it is timely now that if you could read in your direction, if that is the case. And then if any other committee members have a question for our delegations based on that, or we can continue to proceed with this.
Can I just ask if Constable Stam has anything he wants to add before we go to the direction to staff? Do you have anything you want to add?
I don't have anything to add at this time. I would defer to my colleague, Constable LeMay, who has more expertise in this matter, and I'm just here to answer any questions that he may feel I would have more expertise in.
Let's see. Okay. So do you want to go right to the direction?
Point of clarification, Madam Chair, has the motion been withdrawn and we're moving to point of direct? I'm confused.
So we are withdrawing the motion then?
Right.
Is that with the concurrence of committee that motion be withdrawn and replaced with, well, first we'll withdraw the motion, then we'll see the direction. Do I have committee concurrence on that? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, please go
ahead. Direction that the General Manager of Community and Social Services Department be directed to continue the work with Auto Public Health on the processes used to gather any available data of drug paraphernalia from relevant sources by leveraging existing systems, and report back to Community Service Committee and Council with the results of these discussions.
I'm going to ask staff, you've worked with the counselor on this, can you provide some insight? Because I know there was some question in respect to Ottawa Public Health being mentioned in this, and they also can't take direction from us. So can you provide some clarity around this direction, please? And if you're in support, and whether you've worked with Ottawa Public Health on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we did work with the counselor to identify an opportunity to bring information back to this committee about the processes used to gather drug paraphernalia, which would include needles and other relevant paraphernalia. The actual removal of that paraphernalia in community is the purview of Ottawa Public Health and governed by the Health Board, the Ottawa Public Health Board. Ottawa Public Health has indicated to us as staff in Community Social Services, we do not have jurisdiction over the collection of drug paraphernalia. Ottawa Public Health has indicated to us that they are willing to work with us to review their processes and gather some information that we could bring back to this committee for the purposes of information. That is the objective of the direction. And if within that objective, yes, we agree with that direction.
Okay. So thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it. Does any members of the committee have any questions, or are they in concurrence with this? Oh, forgive me, Councillor Troster.
No problem, Chair. Councillor Plante, so the initial presentation was about private security market, and now this direction is about drug paraphernalia. Could you just explain what the concern is that led you to bring this forward? Because I'm a little bit confused by the request, and I'm also not sure it's the right place for it. This might be a public health board matter.
So so I'll just back up a little bit. When we were initially having these discussions, one of the things that came to light was like these private security companies do a lot more than just sort of patrol the grounds. They do first aid interventions. They do administer Narcan. They do pick up needles. They are sort of, like I said, a bit of a buffer between a lot of our frontline services, which they pray for privately. They don't have any They do not gather any data, as far as I know. They don't tell us how often that happens. And so we don't actually know what's going on in the market in terms of overdoses, in terms of needle pickup, in terms of, anything under the criminal code. And so I wanted to know if our private security companies could be not compelled, but asked to provide this information on either a weekly basis, so that way we can have better data in the market. One thing we are noticing is that there's a lot of gaps in data, and my goal as the counselor is to close those gaps so we can make better decisions.
So I guess my question to staff is, do we have any jurisdiction to ask or to order a private security company to provide this kind of information?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, we do not have any jurisdiction.
Okay, I see what you're trying to get at, but I don't think I can support the direction for this reason. But perhaps we could have a conversation offline about how best to tackle this, because I do understand the information you're trying to receive.
There we go. Sorry, I forgot to press the button. Did anyone else have any questions in relation to this direction? Because I will put it to a vote as to whether staff accept this direction or not, and if the council, if that's with concurrence of committee. Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carr.
Hi, yeah, I'll just mention that I'm on Ottawa Police Services Board and Ottawa Public Health, and I feel like the issue is the presentation probably had more to do with Police Services Board, and with respect to what this is more within the realm of public health.
That's one of the things we discussed with staff is we want to get the conversation started. And that's why it's important that we bring it here. And then if asked to, I'm happy to bring it to other boards as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, let's just see if Councillor Carr's finished.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillor Plant, do you have a specific goal in collecting this data? So is it to try to get a handle on the opioid crisis in your ward? Is it try to get a handle on the work that private security is doing that city staff should be doing? I'm just really trying to understand the reasoning.
It is to get better information as to exactly that, the opioid crisis in our ward, and then see what resources are being saved by using private security. How can we better leverage them as we have more shelters in and across the city? And eventually, this is a long-term goal, I would like them to get better trained on things like DEI, use of force, which I'm not a fan of, and the kind of things that can better have outcomes for our residents who are in shelters, because as you know, it can sometimes be a very tenuous situation. And I don't like hearing about these conflicts that can pop up every now and then that you had described earlier. I would like it to be more of a welcoming place for everyone.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say I understand the intent. I just don't think this is the right place for this direction, but thank you.
And just to clarify, I did ask where would be the right place for it. And because they are specific to the shelters, this was where I was guided to.
Did any other committee members have any questions? No. I will say, I think that, you know, hearing the councillor express the intent, what you want to achieve with first the original motion and this, I mean, it's absolutely valid. You're seeking information about this and then potentially solutions. I have to say the roundabout way that we've gotten here and the fact that it overlaps other committees, but it also is involved with Ottawa Police. And I think that there's some confusion in regards to whether, not just whether it belongs here, but whether you're actually going to get the results that you want out of the direction that you're putting forward, or even the motion that you had originally put forward. I have to say, I will not be supporting the direction. I will ask for a called yes, yay, nays on this. And I would encourage anyone to vote with their conscience. But I think that you absolutely should have that conversation. We should have that conversation as a city. We should be worried about the outcomes of it in terms of the implications for your community and the entire community of the city. But I don't think you're going to achieve that with what you're directing staff to do right now. But I think that there's other ways we can get those answers. So I am going to call the vote. I apologize, Councillor Hill. You threw your hand up. I didn't see it, and I have called the vote. So we are going to go to yeas and nays. And sorry, just for clarification, this is on the direction and whether this gets referred to city staff to pursue.
Counselor Hill,
Yes.
Counselor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Counselor Plount,
We,
Counselor King,
Yes.
Counselor Troster,
No.
Counselor Carr,
No.
Counselor Brown,
Yes.
Counselor DeRush,
No.
Counselor Lowe,
No.
Vice Chair Bradley,
Yes.
Chair Dudas.
No.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much to the delegation. Sorry, I should have relieved you so that you can go with, we just appreciated you being here. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Okay. All right, so we are on to item number 11, notice of motions. I don't believe we received any at this point. No. We do, are there any notice of motions? No. We do have an inquiry from Councillor DeRoche. Councillor DeRoche, do you mind reading that into the record, please?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Can the City of Ottawa implement temporary summertime recreational programming on some significantly undersubscribed park and rides for oversubscribed programming such as pickleball, similar to when roads were closed to allow greater recreational benefits? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor DeRoche. Item 13, we don't have any other business at this point. I do want to, before we completely conclude, I did want to take a moment. Today is, at this committee meeting, is the last committee meeting, the last formal meeting, I believe, for Donna Gray as the General Manager of Community and Social Services Department. And I'm going to pause. I'm going to speak very slowly here because we do have a presentation filled with photos. Is Donna there? I can, oh, there we go. Yep. So it was funny because as Eric, as our committee coordinator is prepping it up, I had the opportunity to meet Donna's family, her parents, her husband, her children, I think even a niece at a luncheon that was held in her honor. And I slyly went over to your relatives and said, you know, if there's any photos that you can share that she doesn't want to share, but they didn't send me anything. Lucky for you, they didn't send me anything. Certainly heard some wonderful stories, which I won't share, but I thought it was quite wonderful to meet your family, and they are not sure that you're ever going to completely rest and relax. They said it wasn't in your demeanor, that you'll be busier than you probably ever have been in retirement than ever before. But I did want to quickly speak, and maybe not so quickly, I did want to speak to the contributions that Donna has made to our city. As the general, and sorry, we're still getting it set up. So I'm going to keep talking then. As the general manager, Donna has supported the city's pandemic response, especially for those most at risk, through the Human Needs Task Force, spearheading human services integration, and leading the delivery of services in long-term care, housing services, children's services, and employment and social services. All services and industries that have been touched deeply by recent events and are very much at the core of the health and sustainability of our city. She has been a strong advocate for equity and inclusion, especially here at this committee, and has led the social policy, research, analytics, and service area in collaborating with other service areas to take database snapshots of our city's needs so we can respond accordingly. Donna's leadership in integrating the gender and race equity, inclusion, Indigenous relations, and social development service area into the Community and Social Services Department has been absolutely essential in identifying the barriers diverse communities in Ottawa face in accessing so many of our essential services, and how we can work together with our community to remedy this and achieve systemic change. And I thought this was quite interesting, and I didn't know this about Donna, but in fact, her career started with community and social services. She was on the front lines as a caseworker, and she did that for 15 years. She stayed in social services for 15 years. So her whole career brought her full circle, where she was able to now finish as the general manager of that department, making continued and sustainable change for our community. And over the years, Donna has moved into various and different leadership positions and throughout different departments as well. And she eventually became part of the senior leadership team. She funneled her desire to make a difference by focusing on ways to improve workplace culture and to evolve the services the city delivers. On a personal note, I actually, when I was a City of Ottawa employee, I actually worked, I think 3 or 4 levels underneath Donna. And I remember the first time I knew I was going to get a chance to meet her. She was actually the general manager, I believe, at the time of service, innovation, and performance. One of those long names that the city loves to adopt. And I remember hearing that she was coming to a meeting that I was sitting in on, and of course, I was all aflutter thinking, oh my gosh, a GM is coming down the hall. It's, I could hear her coming with her heels, and she came in, and it was interesting because Donna's warmth and charisma and willingness to listen to everyone around the table, regardless of how high or low they were on the chain of command, so to speak, was so impressive that you just wanted to give more and be more involved in the outcome of whatever project you're working in, whatever you're doing for the city. So I know that I'm not alone in having experienced that. I know many of her staff have felt that way. I know as councillors, we have benefited from her expertise, her history with the organization, but also her outside the box thinking of how to address the issues that our city faces, but also come up with solutions. I totally went off script here. Let's just go. So Donna officially retires on Friday. And while she was recently feted at City Council for her extraordinary career, we would be absolutely remiss to not recognize her at this committee, where she has spent the last many years of her work career and has made such lasting impacts. Donna, we thank you for your unwavering dedication over the last 35 years to the city, to the staff, and to the residents of the City of Ottawa. We bid you a fond farewell, Madame, and we wish you enjoyment and lots of adventure with your family and your loved ones in your retirement.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, that's hard to top, but we are going to the last item, which is number 14, which is adjournment of committee. So we'll leave on a warm, fuzzy feeling at this point, but is adjournment carried? Adjourned? Carried. Have a wonderful day, everyone.